Hi there, Sue here from Maze. Now, one of the topics that we talk most about at Maze is the SEND system and how we get the best educational provision for our children. And this is a bit of a hot topic because we know that the SEND system is not working well for our children. Now, back in May, there was a National Day of Action in relation to the SEND funding crisis. And one of the things that I always talk about a lot at Maze is how important it is that we really understand this topic from all sides, that we try to really listen to each other so that we can get a better outcome. And I thought that it's also important that we apply those same principles when thinking about the SEND system. So I decided to undertake a series of interviews so that I could really understand this from all sides. I interviewed a head teacher to hear about the challenges in schools. I interviewed the Cabinet Member for Education in Essex to hear about the challenges that are faced at a budget level. And I interviewed a parent too. And I started off by speaking to Steven Turnbull, head teacher at Hazelmere Infant School. Thanks so much for speaking to me today, Stephen.
You're welcome.
And I think it's true to say that we've had an association previously because we've kind of collaborated, haven't we, around SEN provision?
We have, we've worked there, we've had several of our staff, myself included, join you for your Maze training as well, and several parents have joined the coffee groups and the training as well. So,
exactly. And so we know that we're sort of on the same page, don't we, when we think about what does good SEND provision look like in the school. Yeah, so that's good. And so what I'm trying to do is just get a picture of this SEND national funding crisis from every angle, which is why I thought it's so important that we hear from schools about how are schools actually affected by this. Mostly what we hear at the parents groups is parents perhaps unsatisfied with the level of support that's been offered for their children. And of course, every parent just cares about their child most of all. But it's true to say that there is this bigger picture about resourcing all of this, that it's important to know about. Hence, there's this national funding crisis. And in conversation, you told me that you have previously at your school been in a fairly favourable position in terms of resourcing, as opposed to how you find things now. So I was wondering if you can explain that a little bit for me. What did it look like favourable, and how does that compare?
When I first started, almost 6 years ago now, financially we were in a very different position. We had significant contingency around. We could invest in the school in all sorts of ways, which meant that if a child had any need, we could fund support resources without really giving a huge amount of consideration to the cost, because we knew we were okay for doing that and that we could always meet their need when it happened, even if it meant, as it often does with infant schools, that it was before any external funding came in. So we were in that very privileged position. I was very clear that it wasn't going to go forever, but it was a very, very good position to be in at the time.
And how long ago was that, would you say, that you
So when I was 6 years ago when I started, that was very definitely the case. Yeah. And we've just seen that amount of reserve just dwindle over the years.
And what sort of percentage would you say is roughly now compared to where it was then?
I would say we're looking at 20% of what we had.
Okay.
It's that significant. I mean, when I took over, we did have a decent amount of reserve the previous head hadn't spent, so it was an unusual situation. But we're seeing significant cuts now where we are just looking at really keeping our team together.
Wow.
And that's
huge.
Anything extra for the whole school is not really happening.
So basic decisions around how many staff can you afford to keep on to support the children, really.
Our budget decision used to be, we look at our core staffing first, and then what else do we want to develop for the school. Now it's core staffing, and that's it. Wow. Pay the bills, and that's pretty much where we are.
Isn't it? A horrible position to be in. And I was wondering if you can just say something really about the ethos of the school. How do you think about that? What's the culture you have of SEND provision at your school, would you say?
We've always believed, and we had a challenging year last year, and we got a significant number of children coming to the school with quite significant needs. And it challenged how we approach things, because it was very difficult for the staff who were trying to meet all those needs. But the thing I think that underpinned everything was that there are children, this is their school, they're local children, and this is a school that they should be able to come to and get what they need. Some of them may need special provision over longer term, but actually they live here, so they absolutely have a right to come to their school and get what they need. And that was actually the simplest way of looking at it. The more complicated bit is working out how you do that. And I think everybody in the school, whether it's support staff who are working very intensely with children with special needs, or whether it's right across the board or across our teachers staff, they all have and share that belief that all the children deserve everything they should have to be successful.
And so if you've got this culture where you're trying to embed this practice and knowledge right the way across the school, can you maybe then say something about the level of training, expertise, experience that your staff team have around SEND?
Sure, so it's really important that all staff have a really clear idea about how we work with all children and their approach and how we understand need, whether it's emotional, whether it's through autism or anything like that. Staff need to be really clear. So we work across the whole staff like that. We've also been very fortunate. We've managed to keep a really good core team so they're not linked to children who will then leave, and so we can continually sort of work with them so their knowledge increases as well. But to a huge degree, it's about making sure that everybody really understands that actually they're children at our school and they deserve everything we can to do. And that, as much as training certainly helps, an expectation of what we do and that everybody buys into that is probably as important to start with.
And I know that that's always about leadership and having that vision from the top that's cascaded down right the way through the organisation, which obviously you're very passionate about. And
sure, it's really important. It's hugely important to me, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to be a head. Is that I thought, well,
despite all the challenges, it's always worth it.
Yeah, it is, because you do get to make the decisions that can provide children and the families the support they need. I don't want any family to come here and feel they've not had what they need.
And I love the fact I'm really getting the sense that you think about every individual child and every individual family and what they might need. I love that idea. And do you still feel, despite the challenges, that there's still space for you to think about it on such an individual level?
I couldn't do it if you weren't able to.
Yeah.
I think if it ever got to the point where I had to decide that children weren't able to get what they needed, or even felt they couldn't bring their children here because we've said, we can't really do that, then that feels like a deal breaker for me. But I don't think I could do that. I can't, there's a lot of things that you have to accept are the stark realities of leading a school, and you'll have your ideals, and then there's somewhere in between is the compromise you get to. But on that, I don't think we can compromise on that. I've been to too many events with parents where anger is the predominant feeling.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure you find that at your groups.
Well, and that's the reason why there's this whole focus, because I think that this SEND funding crisis is the biggest social injustice of our time. Our children are so poorly served. And of course, I feel passionately about it, and I know that generates anger amongst families. Why wouldn't it? But
absolutely. I think it's really important. Somebody told me, I think it was my first ever parents' evening, that I said, I'm really worried about meeting the parents because the child, when they come in, that's the most important thing in their whole world. And it was very wise. TA at the time said, you don't need to worry about it. If that's what you're thinking, then you're on that. And I think that's what we have to remember. And however challenging those needs might be to meet in school, there's someone's little boy or little girl, and they have to go home and they have to do all that over again.
It's so lovely for parents to feel that somebody listens to them about how challenging things can be on the home front and accepts that that's true for them, that does really happen. Because we often see children behaving one way at home and a different way at school. But to have a school that listens and says, I hear what you're saying, let's see how we can help and work together, means everything. And I think that just as long as that's in place, I think that most families are able to tolerate that maybe this day things didn't go quite right, or maybe this day that this activity that had been promised wasn't offered. Those things that just fall through the gaps sometimes. I think it's easier to absorb that as a parent if you think that this school really cares about my child and they're listening to me.
Predominantly, you're getting it as right as you can.
Exactly.
And I think having been a Senko makes a big difference. I think also my son, who's at secondary school now, is diagnosed with autism, and we've had to go through a lot of that, from diagnosis to schools, recognising what that would mean, the shock of secondary school and how that affects. And so to experience it from our own point of view and worry that schools are going to think it's us and our parenting and everything else, it does help. It's not crucial, it can't be prerequisite to be able to do the job, but it certainly helps to see that bit, because I have conversations with parents when you can see where they are.
Yes.
You can see the fear they're at, or the devastation of not quite understanding their child, and that's really hard.
Yeah, it's hard, because we know what that feels like. We all know what that feels like at times, don't we?
It's huge, yeah.
Sure.
It just leaves you feeling terribly isolated and
Yes.
inadequate and worried sick. And I think if schools are being put in the position where they can't say, "Don't worry, we'll do everything we can," that's a difficult one to have.
Yeah, it's awful. Yeah.
No, and I have to say, now I met a parent last week who had chosen another school, had heard about the stuff we do. They're very local. They wanted to come to us. We showed them the facilities we have, which are great. Met some of the staff. They straight away really love them to come to you, and that's great. I can't help them but thinking the second they're walking out, it's like, okay, get the calculator out, because their child's going to need quite a lot of support. How are we going to move the staff around? Do we need to think about recruiting member staff that we've not considered?
No, and I guess that's the stuff that keeps you awake at night, isn't it?
We set a budget. I think there's a push now for setting budgets over longer than 1 year, and that would really help, because I don't know what I'll have by the end of their first year in school. So a child joins our school in September. I don't know what my money will be like in April of their first year. So even committing to it then, I don't know, and I don't know what.
So much worry for you behind the scene, isn't it, when you feel so passionately dedicated to the ethos that you've got?
And you have to hold your nerve,
you do,
for sure.
Of course you do.
But there will, I think, and there are for schools I work with really closely in the local area, they're not holding their nerve. They're at a point where they have nothing. They've got nothing there to give. So then you're challenged with your ethos and the reality. And if you can't do that...
Exactly, which brings us full circle back to the starting point, which is about the whole national funding crisis. Is a huge issue, and I think it's clear to me that it's possible to deliver very high quality SEND provision, which is, I know what you do here at your school, this caring ethos. But actually you're constantly having to think about the calculations about, can we then afford to keep our staff, and how am I going to deliver this support? So if you had a wish for moving forwards in terms of resourcing for SEND for your school, what might that look like?
Apart from just enough money to
more
make it work. Yes, it is about the right deployment staff, for sure, and it's about having the right resources and investing long term if you can. We're very lucky that we've been able to secure an extra building that we can use, which the local authority has supported us with the sort of funding that we would never have been able to do. So I appreciate we're in a very fortunate position in that one, and we've got great staff who really know what they're doing, and they've learned so much over the time they've been with us. But losing that would be awful, and it would mean that those conversations, I'm saying, that's great, we can provide what your child needs, don't worry.
So I'm guessing what you're saying is that you need that 20% that you described at the beginning that's been realistically cut. You need that in real terms now, don't you, to protect what you've got?
If you think about it in terms of reserves, it's probably about 20% of what we had. So it's essentially, in terms of contingency, we've lost 80%.
Yeah, okay.
And that's it's huge. It is a huge
to
amount
have lost 80% in
of
real
any sort
terms.
of contingency, and I think it's disingenuous to be told that school funding has stayed the same.
Yes,
Now, the county council don't say that because they understand that, but it's certainly a message from government, and it's a standard response from the DfE. But the additional costs on school are extraordinary, and it's almost weekly occurrence that something else that we've never had to fund in the same sort of way, we now have to. I had to find £12,000 at the drop of a hat for staff insurance costs, with no warning that was going to change. And £12,000 buys a lot, and that's just one aspect of one part of our budget, which just changed almost out of the blue. And that's, rightly, support staff are being given really quite good pay rises at the moment, but that comes at a cost too. So I'm delighted there about that their pay award is such that they get paid. Well, I'm sure they still don't get paid what they're worth, but
they're worth their weight in gold. We know that.
They certainly are, but in terms of what we rightly they're being paid, but that then puts a huge pressure on same costs, and that doesn't take into account the fact that yes, well, the funding stayed the same. Well, it has, but the demands on that, irrespective of any SCN additional work that might need to happen, has put the pressure on, and that's what's really affected lots of nearby schools who I speak to, and they're just in a position where they just don't have that.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much, Stephen. Thank you. So my reflections on talking to Stephen were that I was really shocked to hear that in real terms they were facing a budget cut of about 80% in the last 6 years. And at Mays we're often talking about how schools maybe don't have the resources to provide the support that we would ideally like for our children, but really what shocked me was that the decisions that they're having to make at a school level now are about, can we afford to keep our staff, not about what kind of support can we put in place for the children. And the other thing I was struck by was the real passion and dedication that Stephen had for protecting and providing for our SEND children, no matter what, even though that might mean sleepless nights for them. I think that's so important that we remember that when we go to have conversations with schools. We have no idea what kind of challenges they're facing. And they do that job day in and day out in difficult circumstances to try to do the best they possibly can for our children. Really worth knowing.